The cheeky and mega nerdy guys at RSS just released a brand new F4 car. And after 6 hours of testing this in races on the Gamer Muscle ranked server, I'm going to let you know what to expect, what you get, and why this type of vehicle is absolutely phenomenal for jumping online racing. This video is sponsored by SimRig Support. If you've bought equipment that's out of warranty and you need it fixing, you should check out SimRig Support because they can probably fix it. They also do SimRig building, SimRig advice, anything that you need to know with sim racing and sim rigs, they probably know it. Check out SimRig Support, link in the description. Thanks for clicking the like button, thanks for subscribing, you have definitely already started to regret it. So what should you expect? Well, as usual, this is an RSS car, so it's pretty much garbage, lack of detail, terrible audio, completely made up numbers, and generally just depressing to drive. After a few races, I lost the will to breathe. Now I'm being sarcastic. It's another really good car, guys. Before I point out the specifics of what's really good about it, crucially, this F4 car and this spec of race vehicle is so perfect for jumping online racing and semi-serious online racing. It's not so slow that you're going to die of boredom. It's not a tank with loads of assists and crap on it like a GT3 car. And it's not too fast for newer drivers to jump in and get good driving from it. It's super stable, really approachable, but really hard to get the absolute most out of it, and still really rewarding once you get the tyres onto the limit and start balancing it and pushing it. If I was Low Fuel Motorsports, for example, this car, along with the Radical SR3, would be the type of vehicle that I'd be running every half hour or so. Mind you, Low Fuel Motorsports, I don't know what they're doing. But this is top notch for online racing and jumping racing and sprint races. Of the 6 races we did yesterday, we had so many 3-wide situations, and there was more weaving than a basket maker's social, with a surprisingly low number of accidents. Though if you do drive into people with this car, they tend to go absolutely flying off the track. I'm not sure what causes that, but that's something to keep in mind. However, it's just a vehicle that is conducive to getting really good racing. And this car in real life is basically an entry for people to get to grips with Formula racing. It's sort of the first serious step on the Formula racing ladder. People go from this to F3, F2 and F1. A great introduction to the effects of downforce, nippy tyres, slick tyres that have grip that comes and goes very quickly, and the type of racing that you tend to get in a Formula car. It's like the sort of next level up from something like a Skip Barber. And obviously in real life this was an attempt in around about 2017 or so to get the cost down for the entry into motorsport, or high-end motorsport, with this season of GB4 costing a mere £150,000 to £250,000. I mean, who can't afford to do that? Let's stop sim racing, guys, and let's all go and do real racing because it's so available for everyone. Sorry, more sarcasm. But in this case, $199, 50% off on the RSS store, and they've got lots of other cars that are well worth getting. So at least sim race is keeping things affordable. Now, in terms of the actual vehicle itself, what really stood out to me with this initially was the quality of the audio. And one specific thing that it does really well is the spatiality of the sound. Now, I've been fortunate enough to sit in a Radical SR3 with a helmet that was blowing off because it was too big for my head. I don't advise that. Try and get well-fitting helmets if you're going to go in a open-top race car. What you notice in that type of vehicle is the engine note is definitely more from behind you, and you also tend to notice that it's the seat vibrating, and those kind of things are what you pick up more than the engine being right next to you or the sound of the engine being in front of you. And a lot of racing games and a lot of sound design in racing games, they tend to get the position of where the audio's coming from incorrect. But in this case, it really did sound, in my opinion, fantastic. Like, oh, there's the engine behind me, there's the intake behind me. You know, that really helped immerse me. Now, it does sound a little bit like a blender, but that's just how some of these vehicles sound. So I don't really know what they can do about that. If you crank the audio up, it's actually quite a nice sound. It's quite raw, but it's just the reality of these cars. I additionally noticed, because you're normally driving very close to other vehicles in this, the external sound of the other cars when you're in the cockpit is really nice and really easy to position where they are from the audio, which is something I really value. I like to use the audio. I focus on audio a lot when I play driving games, and it particularly stood out with this. Of note, if you do get this mod, make sure you use the RSS audio settings and check through their documentation, because you might get some audio issues, or if you're using weird audio settings, you might not notice some of the nicer details. But the audio was absolutely cracking. Now, in terms of the handling of this car, what you will find, or what I found, is that it drives as if it's got quite a stiff rear diff. Now, I don't know if that's on purpose, if that's what the real car's like, or if it's accidental, but what it does mean is that to really get the most out of this vehicle, you have to trail brake quite deep into the corner relative to other Assetto Corsa content, and you also have to really get the car onto the tyres to actually start getting it to be a bit more nimble and to really get the most out of it, which I actually found really fun. At first it was a little bit distracting because I'm really used to driving the F4 car in iRacing, for example, and the cars in iRacing drive as if they've got very open diffs on them. They're very initially rotating, which I actually really quite like, surprisingly, because everyone thinks I'm an iRacing hater. I like nimble cars. However, in iRacing, the tyres just totally break when you get on the limit, but with this, you get in the happy zone when the tyres get on the limit. So even though the diff felt really stiff, or the rotation of the vehicle, regardless of setup we used, the rotation of the vehicle is quite stiff, you get it on the tyres and it's very, very happy and really fun to like try and get it into that state and then get the most out of that state. Interestingly, I got more of a sort of LMU R-Factor 2 feel out of this vehicle compared to most other cars that I drive in Assetto Corsa, especially the characteristic of having to trail brake more aggressively and deeper into the corner. That's something I really noticed in LMU. But then it was like LMU combined with Assetto Corsa's incredible force feedback, and this vehicle itself also has a really natural feeling sort of slip behaviour at the limit. The way the tyres go over the limit and then the grip comes back is very reminiscent to when I've been sat in real cars and even like go-karts and stuff. The tyre behaviour just felt really good on this car. I think it's something that Assetto Corsa, for the most part, really does nail. Though if you lose grip on all four wheels quite aggressively, you'll find you'll slide for a really long time. I'm not sure how realistic that is, but you probably shouldn't be overdriving to that level anyway. You will find as well, in terms of the handling of this car, it is unfortunately a bit susceptible to bumps, and you really have to make sure that you've got your car straightened up if you go over aggressive bumps, and it will do that. Assetto Corsa sort of oscillation takes a while to settle down from bumps, whereas I think the real car would settle more naturally. And if you play iRacing, LMU, R-Factor 2, Automobilista 1, those cars all tend to settle faster from bumps. It's something that Kunos never seems to have got too right. Stiff suspension and sort of bump stop behaviour in AC and ACC seems very overly unforgiving, overly time consuming for the vehicle to settle down. So you have to be careful with setup with suspension on this vehicle, but if you are going over some track bumps, you need to make sure the car's straightened up and you're ready for it. Otherwise, you're probably just going for a trip into the wall and you'll be like, what's happened? Why has this gone on? Probably the suspension. That's why you've gone for your little trip. However, this does take advantage of the new shader patch options with the multi-casted tyres. So it actually doesn't have the curbing issue that a lot of cars have in AC, meaning that with this vehicle you can fully attack curbs and you don't get that sudden curbing spin from being on the throttle on prolonged corners. So tracks like Mugello, Spa, even Road America, you really can attack the curbs as you would expect to be able to attack the curbs without the risk of Assetto mental rear spin from the tyre issue. So that's really great that you really do see that shader patch tyre physics adjustments come into play with this vehicle, and it's the type of vehicle where you will be really attacking curbs. So absolutely fantastic, really. I would say though, those shader patch adjustments do make the force feedback a little bit vague and the car a little bit less responsive. And I would say if you've got a lower end force feedback wheel like a T300, G293, you know, stuff in that ballpark, not a DD wheel or like a wheel that's under 5 Newton meters of force, you might want to use the old files or the original Assetto Corsa physics, which you can just double click a BAT file once you've installed this car, and it'll be running the older physics or the non-adjusted physics. And for those of you that like more snappier response from the force feedback, a more snappier car behaviour, but unfortunately you get that curbing issue, that could be a nice solution. As I say though, if you've got a really nice high-end direct drive wheel, which of course is everyone, who doesn't have that much money to waste on gaming controllers? If you've got a high-end wheel, you know, you can turn your force feedback up and you've got that dynamic range and it still feels absolutely fantastic. So that's just something to keep in mind if you've got a lower-end wheel. Now, definitely worth pointing out the graphics of this car. The steering wheel and the steering wheel display, absolutely fantastic. If you're playing in VR, you'll really appreciate the UI details inside of the actual car. For those of you that will, I'll get this comment, we are using CMRT Complete for our user interface here, which has the leaderboard and all the other stuff on the screen and the revs and gears and everything and the telemetry. I use CMRT largely because I live stream and want viewers to be able to see where we're positioned and what's going on. If I wasn't using live streaming, I'd probably just try and stick to the in-cockpit stuff. So, and also if you're in VR, I'd probably stick to what's just in the car. It's far more immersive to play that way. And as I say, just look at the display on the wheel. It's fantastic. And the cockpit and the car graphics and everything else, all the textures are just spot on. I mean, the F4 car isn't the most luxurious and spectacular to look at of race cars. Let's be honest. But RSS have delivered the Mygale F4 chassis to as close as perfection as you could probably want, really. For those of you that maybe don't know, there's quite a few car companies that manufacture chassis for this vehicle now, or do the F4 spec. Tatus, Mygale, Liger, I think Delara do it. There's a whole bunch of them that do them. It's a specific spec that a lot of companies manufacture for. Now, RSS are using the Mygale chassis, but then I think the data is based on the Tatus. So, but they, all these F4 cars, they're designed to basically be the same vehicle, but different people manufacture them. But the point is, if you see F4 cars and you're like, oh, that looks slightly different, it's probably because it's a slightly different chassis made by a slightly different company, but it's the same spec. Wow, this is information that will be of absolutely no use to anyone in day-to-day life. Now, in terms of performance, sometimes with some mods in the Assetto Corsa, with more detailed mods especially, when you start having larger grids, you start getting big frame rate issues. Now, one of the nice things I've noticed with RSS cars in general is that they normally have different LODs and they're normally quite well optimized. And this car was no exception. Despite having 32 car grids, because our server is so bloody good, and the racing is just so good when we live stream as well, despite having these huge grids, bigger than any real world F4 grid, we actually still got really good frame rates. So that was really nice to get that performance from the vehicle. Now, I do have a 3080 Ti and a IBM supercomputer CPU, a 5800 or whatever it's called, AMD chip, 3D chip, so maybe your mileage will vary depending on your system, but I'd imagine if you're doing like 20 car grids or standard stuff, this should all work perfectly fine. As I say, RSS typically I've found their cars actually run really well and they optimise stuff really well. But there you have it. It's another absolute stonkus of an RSS car. $1.99. You could buy an ice cream. Oh, they're probably like £6 for an ice cream these days. You could buy a quarter of an ice cream, or you could have a fantastic F4 car to drive. And I'm sure many of you, as I say, you'd get this and you'd be like, oh cool, I'm going to do some real world F4 driving, what with it being so affordable. Well, you know, that's it guys, that is it for this video. As I say, we have our server up. It's going to be running the F4 car, so you can jump in and drive that. We have stat tracking and stuff. We do live streaming. We'll do more racing with this. This is perfect for jumping online racing. God knows why LFM do not run this and the Radical. The Radical's free, and this is a cheap payware car that is fantastic. Or they could just run, I don't know, LFM. They have with AC, they could do so much that would be fantastic. But I don't know what they're doing. But it's their service. They could do what they want. Maybe one day they will do what would actually be conducive to good online racing and exploiting the popularity of certain things. Maybe one day. Who knows? Anyway, guys, thank you very much to all the people that are channel members, supporters. As I say, our sponsor of this video is SimRig Support. But until the next one, happy tea drinking, take care, and goodbye.